Hi, beautiful souls. This is Sadhana. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm here to share with you two borderless versions of the Smith-Waite Tarot deck. On the left is the latest incarnation of the Radiant Wise Spirit from Lo Scarabeo. I know this one has come out in a few different versions. This is the 2019 version that comes in the stand-up box with the lift-off lid. If you do not have decks with this kind of lid yet in your collection, just be aware that you don't want to be picking up these decks from the top. They cannot, these boxes from the top, they can end up all over the floor. On the right is the US Games version. So this comes in a tuck box. And I have removed the decks and put them in order for the video already. This one came out about 2017. You can see from the size of the box that the cards are going to be a little different quality, and the thickness also of the enclosed little white book is a little different. So in the Radiant Wise, as with most Lo Scarabeo decks, you have the guidebook in 5 languages. So while this is a little bit fleshed out, and we do have definitely a higher quality production value here because we have some color, we have a little bit of gold, and there are, I believe, some colored pictures in here as well too for the spreads. So the card backs are in color. And this is really interesting. I'm just looking at the guidebook here. These, well, maybe it just looks, they're a little darker here. I know that this deck has come out with a couple of different versions of the card backs. And it was, I believe, on Simon's channel on the Hermit's Cave, where this was brought to my attention. So there are different versions of this deck out there. So please look very carefully, and I'm definitely not an expert on the different variations of this version of the deck. And we will look at the end of the video at kind of the different descriptions in the guidebook. This is the US Games little white book. So it's just your standard little white book. But as with US Games books, it's all in English. The descriptions, however, are significantly shorter. With the Lo Scarabeo deck, you have a title card. And these are the card backs. And with the US Games deck, you also have a title card, which has the High Priestess. And these are the card backs. So just a slightly different color variation of the Centennial card back. And as well, you have 4 extra cards. So if you're interested in collecting more of Pixie's artwork, you get this beautiful card here, which is called Christmas Carol. It was published for sheet music in 1898. It's really kind of special. This one is very mysterious. I can kind of see inspiration for 4 of Cups here or something else. Beautiful, beautiful winter scene. This was a watercolor painting based on the music of Russian composer Igor Stravinsky. So this came out in 1946. And this one, which I haven't seen before, is called Catch Me, and it was an original watercolor painting about 1905, and it was based on Schumann's Opus 10 number 4. And this, my doggies right here, and this one, which I'm sure you have seen before, it's the lover's illustration for a scene from Deirdre, Act 3. So yeah, I've seen this card quite a few times. So they're both a standard size tarot deck, and they are both borderless. So let's go to the cards before we have a look at the guidebook. Let's have a look at the cards. On the left is the Radiant Wise Spirit Tarot, the Lo Scarabeo deck, and on the right is the US Games borderless version. And in the center, I have the mini version of the Centennial that comes in a tin, also from US Games. And so let's have a look at the difference in color, the difference in cropping, whether or not the, just how the font affects you. So on the Lo Scarabeo deck, of course, we have a contemporary font, as opposed to the US Games decks where we have the artwork from Pixie. And this is a lot of decks for me to move the cards, so I'll try to do this as efficiently as possible, as well as keeping an eye on the viewfinder. And just keep an eye on the colors and the shifts in color, and let me know how that kind of affects your perception of the deck. And would it shift your your reading of the card? Would it create a different mood? Would it create, what would it create? And would it even, how would it affect it at all? This deck, of course, is very, very popular for beginners, and it's used by a lot of teachers for instruction. And so would you use the Radiant version when you were teaching? So what happens here in the Borderless version of the Magician is that we have this, to me, what looks like an unnatural gap here. And you can see that what has been created. So if you compare these two cards here, we have basically the same cropping, but this card has created an extension around the outside of the picture. So I imagine that this little bit here is photoshopped, as well as this little bit here. So I was under the impression that this deck had been cropped inwards, but indeed I think it's quite the opposite. The other thing I want you to look at in the Lo Scarabeo deck is the shift in the faces. So to me, in some of the cards, it appears that the faces have been completely erased and redrawn for purposes of clarity, perhaps. Right? So here's an example. The moon color has shifted, and we have we have gained in this one an extra wall, which creates, I don't know, a different sense of spaciousness. Let me know what other things you pick up on too, because I've only been through these decks a couple of times, and so I'm sure there's lots of changes I have missed. One of the things about the Empress is you see in the Radiant deck there's this glow, especially on the left side of her face. And there's lots of changes of color that you see. So yeah, and here this appears quite unnatural to me because this, of course, has been added on. So we have the water here, and then there's this bank on the water, but it doesn't exactly appear to fit. The thing I do like about the US Games deck is that it has retained Pixie's artwork for the titles. So the Emperor looks pretty much the same. So that one doesn't really bother me too much. And then we get to the Hierophant, and we have a shift in background color, among other things. How does that purple on the angel's robes feel to you? I do like the starry skies. I like the extra color here. It just reminds me to bring that element in when I'm using this deck. It also gives more of a connection to lunar energy. So yin energy as opposed to yang energy. Just adding that little bit of blue on the chariot, which is something that I might not always bring attention to. Of course, the black and white does that as well too, but just that little bit of blue in there gives it that lunar edge. And so strength, well, there's a shift in the color of the mountain. That one doesn't really feel like too much has happened here. There's something about the spaciousness of the Hermit in the US Games. So I really like the space around the lantern, because the lantern is an important symbol on this card. And so that feels right. It feels a little bit crowded here, like something has been, shortchanged on that one. It's funny, hey? Some things will feel just right, and other things will feel confusing. Like having so much space around the four creatures around the Wheel of Fortune. It's too bad on the Justice card this wasn't a little more contrast to her robes. Not necessarily her robes, his robes. Pardon me. And please, please don't get upset about any pronouns that I use in this video. I have no attachment to pronouns whatsoever. They're not meant to exclude nor include anyone. The background on the hangman is actually really, really effective. And here we have that, you know, the extra space created. And so I find when the plants come right up to the edge of the border and then this extra edge has been added in, sometimes it gives a weird perception. So notice that in this one, they've retained the glow, the halo around the hangman's head, but in some of the cards where there is this kind of halo effect, it is lost. Okay, I should go a little faster here. We're going to be here all day. Death. Death is quite similar. Definitely we have more saturation and depth of color to look at, and so that might help you, that might help the reader to notice more aspects of the card. Okay. One thing about Temperance that I was wondering is that the sun here is white. So that feels, the rising sun feels a little odd to me. So yeah, so please comment as we go through this on the shifts that you like, the shifts that feel kind of strange. It's kind of cool that we see more of the wings on the double card. I like that. If you have another version of this deck that you really like, or if you have a different variation of this deck, please let me know. And if there's something that I've missed or really speaks to you. Either add that in the chat, or you can, you know, take some notes and add something in the comments below later after the premiere has finished processing. Yeah, and what about that purple lobster? That's really kind of different. Let's just say that for now. But it does bring in an energy. So if you've seen any of my other videos, like colors really do speak to me, and I do use color in reading. And so that purple lobster probably is going to be speaking to a purple color in another card, is what I'm guessing. Yeah. And I do like the cropping on the towers on this one. There's something about that feels right and in balance. And there's definitely a clearer, like the lines, the outlining. There's been a lot of time spent redrawing that. So the sun's face is clear. Color's been added to the eyes. And you can tell there's been some complete changes. Like, I don't know if you notice this, but the belly button, so the navel here is a little further away from the mane. And in this one, it's right up close. So I'm not sure what has happened in the photoshopping process or the editing process. It feels like parts have been retained really authentically and other parts have been completely redrawn. As I mentioned, like some of the faces look completely different. So just kind of glancing, blurring my vision and looking at all three of these, you know, they look very similar. The lion is really changed. So that was completely redrawn. How do you think that Pixie would feel about this, or, you know, anyone else? And would you use the deck on the left with beginners? Do you think it matters? Is it easier to read? Is it more challenging to read? I'm really, really curious about that. And having the hand in skin tone feels very different. So a lot of this, so we have perhaps the Holy Grail, we have the hand of God, and the hand of God now has color tones, skin color tones. So that's, you know, a different, gives it a really different feeling. Sorry, I'll try to keep my eye on the, I know when you go through a whole deck, sometimes it shifts in the viewfinder. Yeah. Okay. And I'm presenting these cards in the order they came in the Lo Scarabeo deck. So this is the order that they were boxed for this one. And that's another really interesting question is when you unpack a box, when you unpack a deck and the pip cards, the minors, are in a different order than you normally would expect them to be. So see how the tree has been completely redrawn? How does that feel for you? Like, which suit do you like to come first? Which suit do you like to come last? Does it matter to you? Because I don't have my I have my opinion about that. And I do have to say I really like this vibrant Six of Cups. It feels more like a fairy tale kind of quality. It feels more three-dimensional. This one feels more two-dimensional. There's something about this that not every card in the deck do I prefer, you know, on one than the other. This card, as well as the Two of Swords, is one where the depth in the sky really kind of shifts the energy of the card for me. Sorry. If there's something else too that you notice, let me know. Like his I don't know what you call them, but his leggings, his tights have a lot of texture here, and here they are just like a solid, they look like a solid lycra fabric, which is really kind of funny. And I guess with the definition of color, some things, you know, they pop more. Here's a face that looks, you know, completely different. Do you like it? And so if you kind of stick with that, you know, traditional Hand of God interpretation, you have that skin color now that is there. And does that kind of shift how you read the card? So here's an example of what I was talking about. In the original artwork, we had these kind of rays of light coming out, but here those have been presented, drawn, edited quite differently. I do prefer the garden. It's nice to have the contrast between the green and the red in the garden on that ace. And what about the choice of font? Do you like the choice of font on the Lo Scarabeo deck? Do you think they could have used a more antique font? I think Simon said in an ideal world, we would have an option for this with Pixie's artwork on it. Okay, so we definitely have more definition in the buildings in the background, a different face, and a more optimistic sky, don't you think? So that might make it a lot easier to read this card if you read this as not being aware of the big picture, you know, being too turned inward too much. So clinging can mean a lot of things, but definitely not being aware and not appreciating the environment all around. And that purple, I do like the purple on this card. So here's an example where the brilliant colors in different cards might speak to each other. I mentioned the purple lobster, and that might really work for me. And the face of this character here looks really, really green, which is weird. Okay. Yeah, and when the clothing is a completely different color too, that might shift something for you. 9. It's quite interesting too how the smaller version of the Centennial, you lose some of the detail. I'd forgotten about that. This is really interesting. So in this one, I really noticed the child is looking away. So the child's attention is drawn in this direction. Don't notice it so much in the other cards. So here we have that beautiful multi-layered background. Yeah, so why are some garments, why do they shift color in other garments? Not at all. Yeah, this is just like the magician. Looks really odd to me. And I guess it just would have been too much work to put the border on the outside. That rabbit does not look real. Okay, King of Pentacles. Even leaves. It does have, I have to say that, you know, if there's something about this, that there's something about the three-dimensionality that really pops. Pixie's original artwork is quite flat, and I know that it's a style, it's different medium. And I also wonder when this deck first became commercially available, you know, what was the source of the artwork? You know, did they find the original paintings that the cards were based on, or were, you know, like, we really don't know how that actual initial printing came about. Maybe we do. Maybe I just don't know. And this is really effective here. So I've often wondered why the ocean is gold in this card. So that really makes sense to me to have the water in that card. Did you ever wonder what this guy's looking at? These two are looking at each other. These two are looking at each other. What's he focusing on, and why is he looking out of the picture? I can't be the only person who's ever asked that question. This would be great. You know those games they have in the newspaper where spot the differences, you know, spot 10 differences? And I wonder too, like, if you notice the flecks, there's like in altering the color of the background, there's like, it's not solid. These are a solid light blue or light beige color, and like we have little blips of green and different things that are not coming from the original art. Whoa, I'm getting my piles mixed up. Okay, 9. I did shoot this once earlier, and I didn't include the centennial in the middle, and I'm glad I've redone it. It's just, it really kind of gives you a fuller picture, shall we say. Yeah, and why did they completely redo the sunflower? That seems odd to me that that would be redone. All right, and then the final suit is swords. To me, I prefer the pentacles last and the wands first. I know I asked you that question. When wands comes first, it just kind of gives us energy to initiate, you know, the viewing of the deck. And this is the card that I really, really like. I think that the illumination around the moon and the fact the illumination is shining on her, it gives a new depth to this card. So this for sure is one that really is makes this deck really great. You can see how much fatter the heart is here. This one looks like a paper cutout. It's great. The stained glass window wasn't changed, or very subtly changed. And I suppose that the Radiant deck may be easier to read with more dimension and more variety of color. I definitely get that. This is a really big difference. Look at the space here. So this foot is way further forward than in this deck. At least that's the way it looks to me. Something about the shift in the tent color too that doesn't seem right. And again, here, I think the change in the background color, change in the sky color is awesome. Because when we have that internal gaze, that kind of blue lunar energy does help with the reading. This blanket really reminds me of the quilt reminds me of the backs of the cards. And I'm wondering, it's like a combination of the two cards. Where's the old Centennial? Right? It's like a combination of these two. And the swords were completely redone. At least the hilts of the swords were completely redone, which kind of lacks. I actually like the way the older swords look. Oh, and I was having a look at the 10 earlier, and there's something about this. So, in the 10 of Swords, I think that this speaks to blood, these little bits of red here. This obviously is a cape that has fallen off, so this figure has fallen face first, perhaps. I know this is not a literal death, but this one here, this looks like more like it's part of the cape or part of the robe or whatever you call it that was worn. And I really want to share with you the guidebook for this card because I think this gives you a really good indication of the difference between the two guidebooks. And if you are a beginner or if you're fairly new to the Rider-Waite-Smith, so let's have a look at the, so I'm reading from the guidebook from the US Games deck. You can see here, you see it's quite short. A prostrate figure pierced by all the swords belonging to the card. Whatsoever is intimated by the design, also pain, affliction, tears, sadness, desolation. Okay. So not much information in the little white book. But what's really beautiful is so here's the guidebook from the Radiant. 10 of Swords. The end to old thought patterns pave the way to new ground. The 10 of Swords is the ultimate end of the situation. It is done, finished, and culminated with sublime drama. The figure lay with swords along his spine, reflecting alternative medicine, acupuncture, and chakra work. A bright and golden sun pierces the darkness of the black night, letting you know a new beginning and a new day is dawning. So you really kind of get that perception here through the little bit of red in the sky. I know you get the light here, but it's really done well in this deck. The figure crafts a secret gesture with his fingers, letting you know this is a metaphorical deck. So pretty detailed information for a small guidebook. And then the last, then the court cards. So yeah. Maybe you've already done this, you know, or if you trimmed your, you know, your own deck, you would have something more similar, of course. If you trimmed your own deck, you would have this cropping, but this artwork. Oops, sorry, night. And the birds are completely different, which I think is weird. So these two birds are the same. Actually, maybe they're just cropped out of the image, because we have a third bird right here. I'm not sure about that. I think sometimes it has been, something may have been erased and then not put back in, or yeah, I really admire people who can do that, like Photoshop or whatever program you're using. It's just so time consuming. And then the Queen. And the King of Swords. This looks like a very feminine face on this King of Swords to me. Like this one feels more angular in the original artwork. This looks like a much fuller face. Yeah. Anyway, I could sit here and stare at these. Here's another example of this green blotch. I'm wondering what that green blotch is coming from. So please let me know what you think. Do you have either of these decks? Yeah, and I hope that you responded to some of my questions if you were chatting with me. And if not, if you're watching this back later after the premiere is done, then please comment below and we can carry on this discussion. Thanks very much for watching. Namaste.